Why do some INFJs despise who they are? I understand that the term hate is used here in a strong way. However, I do believe it's crucial to utilize it since, in more extreme circumstances, it's what some INFJs can actually feel about themselves on a regular basis. One of Myers-Briggs' 8 introverted personality types is the INFJ. Only 1-2% of people have an INFJ personality type, making them one of the rarest personality types. In this video, we'll explore some of the potentially darker aspects of being an INFJ, namely the possible causes of the poor self-esteem, self-loathing, and shame that many INFJs appear to suffer. There should probably be a trigger warning in this case. Be sure to watch all the way through because I'll reveal a crippling emotional ailment that could be driving the hate one has for oneself. Yet it is frequently disregarded. Let's examine the reasons why some INFJs appear to despise themselves. What causes some INFJs to hate themselves? 6 possible causes that you ought to research. 1. Because they were rejected as children, INFJs may detest themselves. It goes without saying that kids in general are delicate and require extra attention. Because INFJ children are frequently also highly sensitive, their parenting may even require a slightly more gentle approach. Unfortunately, the general population is unaware of the existence of INFJs or any other closely related group of sensitive kids since they are so uncommon. Parents prepared as best they could for their newborn children. However, in reality, most people won't take a deep dive into psychology or pedagogy because they don't realize how important it is to understand the nuances of children's temperaments and parent-child attachment bonds. These sensitive children may not be acknowledged for who they are as a result. Their sensitivity may be viewed by the parents as an inconvenience, something out of the ordinary, or something to get around. Those parents may not fully appreciate or comprehend their sensitive children, and as a result, may neglect, shame, or discount them. The practice of trying to change a child's presumed weak sensitive nature may become structural. Many INFJs and other sensitive kids as a result didn't have the majority of their requirements for acceptance, nurturing, and emotional safety addressed during their formative years. As a result, INFJ kids run the risk of experiencing low self-esteem, anxiety, self-consciousness, and feelings of guilt and shame related to their self-concept. They run the risk of carrying these weighty, negative self-perceptions into adulthood. Strangely enough, even as adults, people frequently are not conscious that the deep emotional scars they carry around their self-concept are what are hurting them so badly. Moodiness and self-hatred. 2. Because they unintentionally deal with unresolved trauma, INFJs may despise themselves. Even with the best of intentions, inadequate parenting can have a significant negative influence on sensitive children. It can traumatize an INFJ child to such an extent. What happens inside of kids when specific things happen determines whether or not they'll be traumatized, not so much what happens to them. In other words, how do specific events affect the sensitive youngster? And what are the results? Given this, it is not difficult to assume that sensitive children will typically have a lower threshold for traumatic occurrences. But how would you know if something had traumatized you? Having intense memories of the traumatic incident in question in the form of visual, auditory, and/or other sensory flashbacks is a well-known symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. It seems to the sufferer during those flashbacks as though they are returning to the time when the terrible event took place, with the same emotional energy as the initial emotional response. He or she is reliving it through the senses as if it were happening right now. Post-traumatic stress disorder that is complex. However, the fact that the traumatic incident was quite concrete is a fundamental component of classic post-traumatic stress disorder. For instance, a particular vehicle accident or robbery that rendered the victim helpless and unprepared for life. Children are frequently traumatized during their youth by less noticeable incidents. For instance, there may have been subtle neglect of the child rather than physical abuse that is remembered as beatings. A highly sensitive child can eventually come to feel unworthy as a result of this. Every time they feel neglected as an adult, they could experience a similar emotional flashback to when they were children and feel completely unworthy. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a diagnosis that can be made in the latter situation. Sadly, the DSM committee rejected his recommendation despite the fact that his findings about the presence of CPTSD were supported by sound research. If you frequently have a low, simmering feeling of heartbreak in your body, that could be a clue that you may have some sort of unresolved trauma. Intense guilt, sadness, anxiety, self-hatred, and thoughts of suicide may accompany that heartbreak. Trauma victims frequently hold themselves responsible for what occurred to them, which could lead to their despising themselves. If you identify this in yourself, please get in touch with a qualified therapist right away. 3. Because INFJs have an extremely critical mind, they could despise themselves. Now, being cynical isn't always a terrible thing. A critical mind can be quite useful, for instance, when trying to figure out how to improve particular lines we produced for a research article, or how to organize our days more effectively to attain our goals more effectively. We can produce high-quality work with the support of a critical thinking, something INFJs are considered to be adept at. INFJs excel at focusing in on minute details and taking them into account as they strive for the best outcome in any project they are working on. But when the critical mind is trained to primarily judge oneself, it becomes a handicap. INFJs have a significant chance of acquiring low self-esteem and feelings of unworthiness during childhood if not enough of their needs are addressed, as we've talked previously regarding the INFJ childhood. Early in life, the INFJ's critical mind turns inward and questions everything it does if their parents were particularly judgmental, intolerant, or shameful of their sensitivity. The cause is that it was taught to think of itself as unworthy, flawed, and in need of repair. INFJs frequently experience perfectionism. Here, the unspoken assumption is that individuals must perform and present themselves flawlessly to win favor with others, and stave off severe negative assumptions about themselves. Consequently, the critical mind scrutinizes and criticizes one's own actions, posture, tone of voice, defects, status, and interpersonal interactions on a microscopic level. You'll never win since the critical mind constantly contrasts itself with the outside world. The reason is that you can always find someone in the world who appears to be performing better than you in the area in which you gauge your own performance. The criticism increases if you don't live up to your own mind's unrealistically high standards, forcing you to make an effort to do so, resulting in increased anxiety, guilt, humiliation, self-loathing, and sadness. Now there is a negative feedback loop in place. 4. Because they have a hyper sense of responsibility, INFJs may despise themselves. INFJs have the innate ability to tune into the emotional world of others. The extroverted feeling function, according to Myers-Briggs typology, is in charge of this capacity for intense empathy. The requirement for harmony in interpersonal relationships is almost innate to their capacity to perceive others' feelings. INFJs have a particularly difficult time separating their own feelings from those of other people. The feelings of the other seem to be those of the INFJ. Believing they are in charge of other people's emotions is a common pitfall for INFJs. Being sensitive makes it difficult for the INFJ to cope with changes in both their own and other people's moods. so much so that they could develop an obsession with maintaining harmony in their emotional environment. It initially appears to work like a charm. A well-intentioned INFJ may become exhausted and unhappy as a result of taking on such a heavy burden of feeling accountable for how everyone feels. This can also result in major burnout and unhealthy relationship dynamics. It's possible that the INFJ has become afflicted with the sickness of wanting to please everyone. They run the risk of dying as a martyr for emotional balance. Since it is difficult to please everyone all the time, the hypercritical INFJ may punish himself or herself for ongoing shortcomings. 5. Because they are inadvertently interacting with toxic people, INFJs may detest themselves. Due to their hyper-responsibility, which we've already explored, INFJs are more likely to attract toxic individuals. A strong probability exists that the soft-spoken, kind, and devoted nature of an INFJ will draw other people who are eager to take advantage of the INFJ's attention and energy. Young and naive INFJs who approach life with an open heart frequently experience this. While having an open heart is lovely, it's important to be able to defend yourself from hurt individuals who are either purposely or accidentally up to no good. Sadly, INFJs discover this the hard way after at least one instance of abuse, manipulation, or taking advantage of them. Due to their sensitivity, this encounter was probably so upsetting that they decided to permanently shut their hearts. After that, they might continue to be constantly on the lookout for poisonous people in order to protect themselves. Though it is difficult for them to realize that not everyone has nice intentions before such a genuinely traumatic meeting. Without realizing it, they may have drawn and be interacting with a few toxic people. Because they are continuously sacrificing themselves to meet the unreasonable demands of those toxic people, INFJs may experience exhaustion, depression, guilt, and humiliation. It's also possible that they may have been subjected to subliminal emotional abuse. They might fervently believe that everyone is harmless and that you should constantly help others no matter what, so they won't associate feeling terrible with these toxic people. Consequently, individuals could feel awful about themselves without understanding why. 6. Because they were rejected during puberty, INFJs may despise themselves. Puberty. With all the metaphorical choppy waters, thunderstorms, and sea monsters, it can be a very difficult stage of the sea to navigate on the journey to adulthood. Peer groups play a significant role in this subsequent stage of identity development. In high school, you can quickly spot recognizable crowds. You have the athletes, cheerleaders, gamers, skaters, musicians, goths, and so on, of course. Teenagers join the peer group they identify with the most in order to feel included and have a sense of belonging. Teens who identify as INFJs may have difficulty finding peers because of the rarity of their particular features. There aren't many people who resemble them. As a result, they could struggle to fit in with a suitable peer group and miss out on belonging to a larger group or throng, as well as the sentiments of kinship and acceptance that considerably aid in the formation of a good self-image at this stage. The INFJ's path through adolescence might be particularly rocky if they were not accepted by their parents and have previously experienced low self-esteem. INFJs are frequently seen as misfits by their peers who share their lack of understanding of them. As a result, INFJs frequently experience self-isolation, peer isolation, loneliness, and bullying during adolescence. This serves to further reinforce the INFJ's low sense of self. This can really make the INFJ feel flawed, unworthy, and lost in the world because at this stage they frequently don't understand themselves. Sadly, there is a good probability that they will continue this into adulthood. Conclusion: toxic shame. We've looked at a few potential reasons why INFJs might dislike themselves in this article. I am aware that the word hate has a lot of power. I believe it's necessary to name it like it is, knowing that this intense self-loathing can be felt as hatred for oneself. It's a key component of what is referred to as toxic shame. Deep-seated shame over one's own identity is referred to as toxic shame. It is a very crippling emotional disorder that results in depression, self-hatred, and social isolation. It is highly possible that you may be carrying toxic shame if you can relate to several of the potential causes of self-hatred that have been described.